The first sound is not the wind. It is the voice from the barangay loudspeaker, thin and insistent in the velvet dark. Signal number 4. Evacuate now. Then the wind arrives, a drawn breath that never exhales. And the sea begins to speak in a language the island remembers, even when people pretend to forget it. On Katanguins, where posts lean a little from years of salt and storms, Lisa ties a blue cord around a plastic bin stuffed with birth certificates. And a photo of her mother as a girl. Ben, she calls into the next room. Wake Tate. Her father, Mangtino, is already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, wiping salt from his eyebrows with a small towel. The banca is tied high, he says. Not as reassurance, not as worry, but as a fact. The house shivers slightly as a gust tests its nails. Lisa's phone buzzes. Pagasa has upgraded the storm. The words rapid intensification glow cold from a small screen. She pockets the phone and picks up the bin. We go now. They join the street's procession. Neighbors carrying children and chickens. The old woman from the tindahan with a bag of bread. The barangay captain walking backward with a megaphone, urging, cajoling, counting. The air is full of rain without raindrops yet. The storm's breath pulls ocean into sky. In the basketball court that becomes a shelter in every season, volunteers unroll mats and stack bottled water. A priest carries a box of candles. A nurse from the rural health unit tapes a hand-lettered wash sign near basins lined up like a row of small boats. There is choreography here, learned and relearned each year. The register, the count, the welcome, and the warning. Outside, the wind sharpens. The local radio repeats the same instructions and the same numbers. Storm surge up to 3 meters along the east-facing coast. Landslides possible in mountainous barangas. High tide at 2. The announcer's voice betrays a crack once when he says the word. Liza thinks of the last time she heard a voice shake like that 2013, when she helped carry sacks of rice into a church in Samar. That smelled of wet wood and fear, and the word Yolanda became more than a name. She blinks hard, looks around the gymnasium at faces turned toward her in the way people look at anyone wearing a volunteer badge, and smiles. Hand washing first, she says to a line of children, demonstrating with the patience of a teacher and the speed of a person who knows minutes count. In Manila, hundreds of kilometers and 1,000 decisions away, a wall of maps glows inside the operations center. The NDRRMC watch officer traces the storm's eye with a stylus on a touchscreen. Numbers stack in the corner of the screen. Populations in the path by bar. The count of prepositioned family food packs in warehouses from Legazpi to Dead. Available Coast Guard assets. Bridges likely to close. A call from the AHA Center in Jakarta blips gently on a secure line. Their disaster monitoring and response system has painted the region orange. ARAT members are on standby. Keep us posted, the voice says. The cadence calm from practice. The content urgent, as always. Across the South China Sea, the storm does not exist yet as a problem. In Da Nang, Tuan pulls his coracle farther up the sand and squints at a sky that looks innocent. In Hue, a hydrologist named Min checks the Perfume River S levels. Even though there is nothing to be read there but history in a steady line. In Kwangnom's highlands, a road crew eases a grader over a patch of red earth still scarred from last year's slides. In Bangkok, the Chao Phraya glides past temples and towers, low for a Thursday in this month of rain, and tourists take photographs of themselves against a sky that will, enough, view days, change the mood of everything under it. The first rain comes as if someone remembered, abruptly, to turn on a tap. It is simple at first. Drops. A patter. The patter becomes a roar as sideways rain rakes the gym's tin roof, and conversations slow as people listen to the arithmetic of the downpour. Then wind. Not as gusts, but as a constant. Screws begin to complain quietly in their holes. The barangay captain's phone rings endlessly. A mother late to the shelter. A teenager refusing to leave his motorbike. A fisherman who promised to come in and did not. Liza checks her list of pregnant women. The names she carries like beads on a string. She sees one face and not the other and puts her raincoat on. Where? she asks the captain. He points toward the mangroves, where the creek opens to the sea. They tried to wait for high tide to pass. The captain's wife presses a flashlight into Lisa's hand. "Take John," she says. And John arrives with a coil of rope and a stubborn expression. The wind tries to push them back as they step into the night. The first corner of the roof lifts and slaps back. Children cry and then fall silent, discovering the trick of conserving fear by hoarding it. The generator coughs into life. The lights dim and then steady. The sound of the small engine, a reassurance thicker than prayer. In the church next door, bells ring twice. It is not a warning. It is two men checking to see if the rope still works. On the coast, the seawall that kept 3 typhoons out last year takes its first punch. The wave breaks differently than the others, with less flourish and more intention, and water spills over and through the newly trivialized gap between wall and sky. "Close, close," John says, though there is nothing to close. They are almost at the stilt houses, the mangroves, bending under a wind that wants even the shore's trees to bow. Liza cups her hands and shouts her name. It disappears into rain and returns as a cough. They find them in the ladder, Chateau boys, and a grandmother. Water already up to the 3rd rung. "Where is Nane Luz?" Liza asks, and the grandmother points with a tremor at the banca. The rope becomes a tether. The bodies on it a string of beads moving towards safety with the jerkiness of beads over knots. The first boy slips and rights himself. Laughter bubbling up too loud for the storm. A sound of a body working. The only way it knows how. Any other day, Liza would smile. She does not, now. The next gust takes her breath. They reach the main path. The water there is slower. More they deliberate ankle, then shin, then knee. "Go," she tells John. "I will find Nane Luz. At the wharf, the world is noise and movement that does not go anywhere. Bankers slap against each other like fighting dogs. A yellow slicker clings to a form hunched over a knot that refuses to be untied. "Luza!" Lisa shouts, and in the same second the slicker lifts its head and the storm lifts one of the boats, spins it, slams it back, and someone screams. The light in the gym flickers. The radio on the captain's table stutters and goes to static. In Manila, a cursor blinks, and then the power dips, and the UPS kicks in. Anti-storm, SI tightens another notch on a map that means much and nothing at once, and on Catanduanes, at the edge of the wharf, a hand reaches for a rope as the wall of rain becomes a wall of water. And the rope moves like a snake in a river, then snaps tight around a wrist. Liza plants her feet. The first wave recedes with its human cargo still attached. "Keep breathing," she says to Los. Not as instruction, but as magic. And they stumble toward the simpler violence of the street, where the water can only push from one direction. Inside the gym, the roof peels back in a new place. Volunteers move people without using the word panic. Inward under the thicker beams toward the stage where the portrait of a former mayor watches this as he watched the merienda in the town's summer dance with the same benign The generator coughs once, twice, then soldiers on. A dark trickle snakes down a wall and spells a warning about the next hour in a language anyone can read. The barangay captain's megaphone dies and he switches to his own voice, which fills the gym better. "Baidan, the typhoon's eye has made landfall and then passed. The storm opening one of its casual blue windows, overdowned trees, and a plucked landscape. There is even birdsong audacious in a sky that will close again soon with the trailing wall. In that, reprieve the shape of loss emerges. Roofs wrong. Fish pens gone a road torn as if an animal worried it. A landslide across the only path to the high barangay, where a dozen houses hang in mud like ideas not yet decided. The first messages leave the island when the cell tower remembers itself. Photos fly along phone lines and into servers and across screens inside offices, where logistics officers inhale and begin their sequences. The DSWD tallies, family food packs, and fuel. The Coast Guard prioritizes which cutter gets which port. The Philippine Air Force checks the rotorcraft. Pilots swap old jokes that function as incantations. The NDRRMC collates damage reports, best numbers in the worst hour. People safe in shelters, bridges closed, roads passable only for high-clearance vehicles. The tally of those not yet accounted for. In Jakarta, The AHA Center pings the national focal points and opens a virtual room. ERAT, deployable within 24 hours. Offers of relief from neighbors lined up in a queue of good intentions tempered by customs and coordination. The UNHRD warehouse in Sabang checks stock, tarps, shelter kits, wash modules, VHF radios, cold chain equipment. AWFP staffer calls Clark Air Base. A pilot position is promised on the first military flight when weather is not a threat. The International Federation moves pins on a digital map. The Philippine Red Cross already has people on the ground because they live there, while trucks rumble and planes pre-flight. The storm does not rest. It survives the spine of Luzon and spills back into the sea, reshaping itself over water warmer than the elders. Remember, meteorologists in Quezon City and Tokyo and Guam watch models adjust in real time. The storm tightens over the West Philippine Sea. A new eye forms. The track bends. West-northwest pressure falls. The words re-intensification and South China Sea are typed into emails and spoken into cameras with the practiced care of people who know the value of not sounding alarmist when sounding alarm. Vietnam hears before it feels. The loudspeakers in wards and villages. Taloa, Piache, Nak. Whom to live in the afternoon with voices that belong to the state and, today, to the weather. Bring boats ashore. Secure roofs. Do not attempt to cross flooded areas. Min sits in the flood control room and hew eyes on a dashboard that's brought the old river into the present. Real-time gauges along the Huang, the Buhong, the Buao. Reservoir levels, like patient charts on the upper sheets of a hospital bed. He knows how quickly a lull becomes a rush. He texts his wife. Home by 8. Maybe not. Move the motorbike to the upstairs landing. On the beach at Da Nang, Tuan drags the Kurokul farther still. The sea has changed color. The friendly green turned to something that looks like it might stain. He counts the knots in the rope that will keep the boat from becoming a projectile and then counts the faces of the men who should be here and are not. He leaves room for them to arrive late, because fools and saints share that habit. Thailand reads it two ways at once. The Thai Meteorological Department plots the storm's western edge and the map of its reign, the tail sneaking already across the Gulf. In Ubanrachu Thani, aunties gossip about 2019 and the way the Mon and Chi rivers taught everyone the difference between flood and flooded again. In Ayutthaya, a factory manager strokes the concrete of the new flood wall like a talisman and checks. Again, the height of sandbags at the doors. In Bangkok, an engineer in the Department of Drainage and Sewerage draws an arrow from the north and circles the word synchronization next to a sketch of the Chow, Freya, and the Klongs. Delesum from 2011 sits behind him like an older cousin always present, never interfering unless asked. Back on Katanjuans. Under the half-peeled roof, Liza counts heads in the shelter. She is short 3. They went to watch the sea, someone says. And she closes her eyes a second because of course they did. She steps back into the hallway to call the barangay's rescue volunteer on channel 3. He answers on 2 because 3 is full of chatter. We have to hold until noon, he says. The ferry, maybe. She reminds him about the antiseptics and the tetanus shots. He reminds her to drink water. There is affection in their scolding and exhaustion. The second wall of the storm arrives. By dusk in Luzon, the back half has passed and left its aftertaste. A damp heat, the smell of ruptured banana trunks, the high whine of mosquitoes that have sprinted into opportunity. The sea relaxes without forgiveness. The first ferry noses into the half-broken port with a delicacy that suggests it has no idea how much it is carrying. Sacks of rice and boxes of bottled water and more press-use satellite phones, tarps, generators. The customs officer looks up, shrugs a tired shrug, and stamps everything with a flourish he learned for days like this. Over the South China Sea, the cloud shield spreads like bruising. The storm's finding itself again, tasting energy like sugar. In Da Nang, shutters rattle against their hinges for the first time. In Hue, a screen blinks a warning as an upstream gauge climbs fast. Min calls the dam operator, and the conversation contains more silence than words. We release, the operator says finally, gradual. Min nods, though no one sees. No sudden, he says. No surprises, as if either is entirely his to give. Thailand's northeast feels the inhalation before the shout. A slow, soaking rain assembles itself over Isan, and everything that holds water, the fields, the paddies, the roadside ditches, takes it. Patient at first, then the line groups buzz through villages, raise the pump, move the ducks. The sandbags are at the municipal office. A monk claps boys on the shoulder and points to the boat shed. They roll the aluminum boats out and stand them in the rain like beetles. A message flashes on the AHS Center's screen. Vietnam requests information management support. Possible ERAT deployment to central provinces. In Manila. ERMC sends back. Initial needs. Shelter repair kits. WASH. Most immediate gaps in hard-to-reach barangays. Customs exemption letter attached. In Bangkok, DDPM forwards bulletins to provincial governors and checks its warehouses for water purification units. The region is a string stirred by a single wind. In Da Nang, the streetlights switch on in a rain that erases the distance between ground and sky. Tuan closes the last latch on his door and puts a pot under the leak he knew about and another under the one he did not. The first gust hits so hard it feels personal. In Hue, Min watches the river's line kink upward. He takes a breath and reaches for the microphone that speaks to a loudspeaker network older than most of the city's streets. Attention, citizens, he says, and the room listens because the storm is walking inland with its hands out. And what it takes first is balance. Bridges sway, reassuring in their designed flexibility until a curious human doubt opens. How much is too much? In Da Nang, the palms do what they have always done, bend and not break on still. Under them, things break. A sheet of corrugated roof acquires flight, flips, claws a gash in a wall as if a giant took a swipe at the neighborhood. A transformer pops with the flat crack of a book slammed shut, and the street returns to candlelight and phone glow. The wind is only half the story. Inland, where Quang Nam rises into hills, rain finds old scars. A slope remembers where it failed last year and tries fidelity. A thin line of red earth becomes a rivulet. Penne stream, then something alive and intentional. It moves across the road, takes the shoulder, eats the asphalt with the indifference of appetite. A bus driver reverses too late, and the front tires sink with the slow, deadly politeness of mud taking a hat. Half the passengers climb out into rain that makes them look as if they were built from water. The other half wait for men in yellow helmets to make a plan that works until it doesn't, and then works again. In Hue, minute by minute, the perfume river lifts toward the memory lines carved onto concrete steps marks with dates that the elders can recite like liturgy. 1999, 2020. The water is brown and busy, carrying branches, a chair, a barrel. The dam releases are careful. They are also insufficient to cancel the storm's broad math. Min screens show upstream gauges, rising in small, scary, synchronized ways. He speaks into the microphone with a steadiness he creates. Sentence by sentence. Move vehicles to higher ground. Avoid low-lying roads. Prepare to shelter in place. A school gym in Da Nang becomes the city's 5th official shelter. A 6th opens itself because the principal never closed the gates. The Vietnam Red Cross unpacks cots with hands that remember the folds. Volunteers in red vests moving in lines that make new order from the storm. It's improvisations. A grandmother knits near a pillar, and the yarn takes on a dampness that suggests it will never be a scarf. And still she knits, because hands need tasks. A nurse sets up a corner for oral rehydration solutions, and mothers queue with a practiced patience that frightens the nurse a little. A teenage boy charges phones from a solar panel his science teacher bragged about. People call that teacher a genius, and he blushes in the dark. The sea punishes Da Nang's front step. But the worst violence for most is the freshwater inland. The way it rises up calm and implacable from places where it is not supposed to be. Hoi An's yellow walls take the color of wet paper. Boats appear in alleys that never met boats before. The Thursday Bon River lifts itself into living rooms and considers new routes through town. The UNESCO sign does not matter here. The river does not read. Thai radios murmur in kitchens as rain drums on roofs. The words are familiar. Retention, Diversion. Discharge. In Yuban Ratchathani, the Mun River pinches itself between banks, fattened by farms and wet-season grass. It moves faster, less polite. In Yasathan, people roll their fridges onto truck tires and lash them with rope. A trick learned from neighbors and practiced for visits from the river. The DDPM Center sends a note. Expect crest in 4 days. Lasts longer than last time. In Autaya, a crane lowers sandbags into a gap and men push them with their boots. Silhouetted by floodlights. Sweat indistinguishable from rain. Factories in the industrial estates check their pumps and then check again. The managers harboring a tiny superstition that checking a third time will convince the water of their seriousness. Bangkok watches the numbers upstream with an alertness that feels like anxiety's logical cousin. The monkey cheek reservoir skim ling sip at the first excess, then take gulps, then look at each other like polite hosts running out of chairs. In Klong Toe, a woman who sells noodles counts how many times the pump has kicked on since noon. She texts her brother in Pathum Thani. How high? He replies with a photo of his fence post and a wet knuckle. She adds an extra plastic table leg under the lowest corner of her cart. On Katanjuans, the recovery has begun, even as rain squalls continue to visit. Liza steps over a fallen coconut frond and checks in on an old man sitting on a stool in his house that ISNT, under open sky. Eat, she says, and sets down a pack. Rice, sardines, a packet of salt. The church bell rings. Noon. The volunteer ties a new rope to a cracked pillar with a hand that looks like a map. The Air Force helicopter thwops overhead with a reassurance so loud it makes children cover their ears and grin. The cargo net swings with the small arrogance of gravity defied. The pilot waves without looking and arcs away toward the next barangay. International offers collect in inboxes. Tarps, chlorine tablets, mobile storage units, tents. A customs officer texts a cousin at the pier to clear the lane. The World Food Program flight plan becomes a schedule of steel birds and pallets. Dea Centre Saratim lands in Manila with reflective vests and diplomacy, and a system for counting that survives heat, humidity, and miscommunication. They slot into NDRRMC's rhythms like a new instrument in an old band. In Hue, a thin decision moment arrives. Open the sluice more and risk downstream flooding, or hold and risk the dam's health. Min looks at the screen and then out the window at a sky that has equal argument for both risks. He chooses, and the numbers respond with the cool gratitude of physics. Downstream, the water thickens in lanes that match the riverbed's greed. People step back from the bank with the instinctive respect of those who have watched a river change mood mid-sentence. Kwangnam's hills give up a slice. A landslide rides down with slow majesty and abrupt consequences. A house loses its back half neatly, as if measured and removed. Two men with flashing helmets kneel in red mud. They speak gently to a voice under a plank. Hold on, we are here. In Da Nang, a father clicks his tongue at a leak and sets a pan and then another and then gives up and moves the bed. Outside, a tree leans against a power line, and the line, tired of such company, lays down in the street and sleeps with a hiss. Thailand S. Northeast. Hears the siren of a hospital generator and reads in it the book of the coming days. Stomach bugs, snake bites, the subtle fevers of skin infections. Village health volunteers Iosor more lay out soap and teach hand washing as if it were new. A district officer types out a request for wash supplies and hits send and remembers, belatedly, to breathe. In the night, frogs sing too loudly. The river creeps into a schoolyard and then into a classroom, touches a blackboard as if to erase what it said. In Autaya, a decision is taken to open a gate that will flood a field and save a factory. The farmer understands the math and hates it. The bank will not understand. The village headman shrugs in a way that says he has seen this shrug before. The state promises compensation that will arrive when the water forgets. Men in uniforms cut the ribbon on a flood they called planned retention when they put it on a slide. The breaking point is not a scream. It is the moment the perfume river climbs the last step on the concrete where old dates pause and a new date will eventually be painted. It is the moment the Mun River lifts a refrigerator and carries it 3 meters, and the owner lets go of the rope and watches it go, cursing and laughing because to do anything else would be to grant the river too much dignity. It is the moment a nurse in Da Nang takes a blood pressure and hears not just a pulse, but a storm inside someone else's chest, and, for a second, hers too. In Hugh, Min stands, exhausted in a room of screens, and tells a colleague to take the chair. "If we get through the next 6 hours," he says, and does not complete the thought, because the next 6 hours insists on being lived before they are counted. In Bangkok, an engineer traces a finger along a klong on a map and says, "To no one and to the city," holding a utea. A water line sneaks up the concrete of a substation yard and licks the toe of a transformer. A man in a hard hat looks at the level, looks at the sky, and reaches for his radio. And the first word he says is now. Pumps, cough, and then bellow. A human chain lifts sandbags with the tender brutality of desperate care, each bag thudding into place like a heartbeat. The floodlights cast everything in a theater's light, flat and unforgiving. Moths, indifferent to crisis, swarm toward the brightest things they have ever seen. In Bangkok, the klongs become conveyors. Gates open, shut, adjust. Flow rates tune like instruments in an orchestra facing a conductor with shaking hands. The chow freya shoulders its burden without complaint and then cannot hold another armful and spills into a walkway where a couple in office clothes had planned to eat grilled pork. They hold their plastic plates above the water and laugh for a second and then stop, as if remembering that tomorrow will be complicated. Ubon Ratchathania's neighborhoods move, not to somewhere else. Not yet. They move up, beds onto tables, tables onto blocks, blocks onto boxers. The aluminum boats grow useful, not just as promises. The Royal Thai Navy slides rubber boats off trucks that look as if they should not be able to carry so much and yet do. Volunteers stand in waist-deep water with their arms out, receiving bags of rice and bottles of water and a grandmother's handbag, as if all are equally important. In the heat, everyone is beautiful with sweat. Disease waits. The first cases of leptospirosis always come on day 3. Day 5. A clinic prints a line of posters about boots that no one will wear because no one has enough. And because boots are clumsy in floodwater, you cannot see the bottom of chlorine tabs pass from hand to hand with an authority that belongs usually to cash. A nurse mixes oars with a practiced wrist and looks for signs of dengue that the mosquitoes will be considering. In Da Nang, the wind has lost its first fury and found a steadier, lower anger. The city hums under it. A creature that has learned to breathe while pinned. The Vietnam Red Cross coordinates with the People-less committees in neighborhoods where the state is a familiar face. Announcements come, not like orders, but like reminders from a cousin you see often. Keep phones dry. Check on the old and the alone. Do not step into moving water. The advice sounds too small in the face of this. It also saves lives. Hugh listens to its river with the concentration of a patient heeding his own heartbeat. The water slides just shy of scorn over the last step. Min laughs once, a dry bark. Because he had not realized he'd been holding his breath. "We got our 6 hours," he tells the colleague who took the chair, and she snorts. Not kindly, not unkindly. "Next 6, she says, and the river, ignoring, team continues at its chosen pace. On Katanjuanes, the second day smells of diesel and wet wood and cleverness. A Philippine army truck grinds through a brown road that used to be gray, and men hop down and form a line, and the family food packs move hand to hand as if they were already food on plates. A doctor from the provincial hospital checks a pregnant woman's wrist for swelling. A midwife will likely earn her science in daylight not meant for babies. A Coast Guard cutter sets a small boat into the water, a smaller boat into that, and the last boat ties up at a jetty, made from logs in intention. A tarpaulin flaps on the church wall. Cash assistance, AICS, with a number that will take calls when the generator rests and the signal's mood improves. The World Bank brokered parametric insurance for the national government triggers on wind speed and makes a line in a spreadsheet change from yellow to green. In Quezon City, a finance officer exhales an unphotographable relief. The money will tuck under the edges of all these things. Water, rice, fuel, time. Back in Thailand, Awataya's substation looks like a small fort ringed by better sandbags. The engineer's radio stays busy, a woodpecker in his ear. "Hold for 1 more hour," a voice he trusts says. He cannot ask. Or what? Because the answer is that the city goes dark for a week and nobody wants to put it into a sentence. Trucks arrive punishingly slow through water that bows to slip around their tires. Men in fluorescent vests set their shoulders under a generator that weighs more than pride. Factories make their particular music. The metallic scream of a shutter pulled down. The click of a line stopped. The rush of pumps that took 3 years to install after 2011 and have already paid for themselves 3 times this month. An owner stands on a catwalk and watches numbers he does not share with his workers' power draw. Water ingress, production loss per hour, and thinks in 2 currencies. Bought and sleep. In the Isen countryside, the word kemling becomes a verb as a field. Resigned. Accepts water from the road. A teenage boy laughs at a carp flopping into a furrow and grabs it with both hands to the scandalized joy of the watching aunties. It goes into a bucket with 2 others and then into a pot. A disaster is not a festival, and yet humans make small festivals wherever they stand for too long under the same cloud. Vietnam's central coast lives that rainy afternoon that goes on for longer than it has any right to. When finally the wind drops a degree and the rain steps back an inch, an army of brooms appears. Men and women sweep water out of rooms with a fervor that would be comic if it were not devout. Hoi An's old town scrubs mud from yellow walls as if washing a child's face. The river says it is not finished, and they say they are not either. The conversation is old, a ritual with no agreed ending. International help finds its grooves. The AHA Center's ERAT team, wearing ASEAN on their sleeves, sits in US provincial EOC and translates priorities into forms that will make tents into shipments and shipments into shelter. The UNHCR trucks back toward a field with a sigh of relief from a driver who has not slept. He will help build family tents and then sleep under one of them, because logistics is a circle. UNICEF staff count latrine staves like they are gold, and today they are. IFRC deploys its regional disaster response team. The Thai Red Cross sends a water purification unit to the northeast, with a captain who tells jokes so bad they bend into charm. In Bangkok, the government holds a press conference where a map of gates and numbers is a kind of incantation. The journalists ask about compensation. The minister speaks of process and speed and rubs at his eyebrow when the cameras look elsewhere. A city of canals and cement tries not to blink. The noodle seller in Klong Toi lifts her cart's legs again and decides that if the water rises 1 more inch she will move to blocks west to a friend's corner and she will sell there, and so the economy bruised insists on breathing. Night brings a meaner profile to the water. In Otaya, the floodlight glare flattens faces into courage without witnesses. Frogs and insects sing like a crowd. The engineer at the substation puts a hand on the metal crust of a breaker box as if it were a sleeping animal and says, "Don't." A boy with a plastic boat yanks its string to keep it from drifting into a deeper current and looks over at the men with sandbags and feels. Just then, a bird flaps up out of the hedge with a squawk, and all the men jerk, a muscle memory that makes them laugh. The radio crackles with a word that drops through the roar like a coin. Crest. In Hue, the dam release schedule holds. A man on a motorbike throws a loop of rope onto a tree and leans back as the current tries to take the rope and the bike and the man. He shakes his head and clips the rope to a hook with the contempt of a person who has outlived 3 floods and intends to outlive this one as well. Min texts his wife. Home tomorrow e intends Italiano. The river will decide. On Catanduans, Lisa sits on a step under a sky that has finally, briefly, run out of water. She eats rice from a plastic plate with her fingers and tastes salt and smoke and the iron of her own blood from a split lip she did not notice before. The generator hums the background note of a soon-to-be quiet night. A child sleeps under a mosquito net that looks like a dream of safety. Someone begins to snore, far away, over a hutaya. The waterline hovers at the toe of a transformer like a dare, and in the second before it decides, a grown man runs with a sandbag like it weighs less than his regret. The bag thuds down into a seam, and in that strangely theatrical way water has when confronted with human audacity, it hesitates. The pump at the substation hacks, coughs, steadies. The floodlight flickers and does not go out. The cheer goes up, not loud. Exactly, but deep. The sound of lungs remembering something older than electricity. The water does what water always does. Eventually it poses, and so gently it would be an insult to call it mercy. It begins to lower. The crest rides past Yuban Ratchathani. With the grace of something that never noticed it was dreaded. It leaves behind mud that will take weeks to coax out of cloth and off skin. Boats thump against doors that used to be walls. The first brooms return to their corners. The first mosquitoes arrive with the entitlement of kings. The first lists begin. Damage. Needs. Who needs it most? What can wait? What cannot? DDPM teams count. The village health volunteers knock on each house. The school principal opens a ledger with a sigh he hides from the students. In Vietnam, the wind has given up. The water clings. Hoi Ans walk in streets, test their name. Mud peels off in sheets under bristles, revealing yellow paint that seems insolent in its cheerfulness. IFRCZRs. Anchor awash setup, turning runoff and murk into something without smell. Women breathe relief, you can hear. The Vietnam Red Cross distributes tarps and kits with hammers and nails and quiet resolve. The People's Committee posts a list of households eligible for support and reads off the names through loudspeakers. The names sound like a blessing and a bill. The fishing boats remain on shore longer than anyone likes. Tuan walks among them with a hand on his coracle as one might touch a dog, and tells himself 3 days. 4, if the sea is still untidy. On Katanjuanes, the air tastes of sawdust. The chainsaws began at dawn and will not stop until the street remembers straight lines. DSWD's AIC's desk under the tarpaulin writes names, amounts, signatures, the bureaucratic liturgy that turns calamity into receipts and, sometimes, into justice. The parametric payout to the national government has begun to move. Fuel for trucks, overtime for crews, cash in pockets, no ceremony. Just a text that arrives on a cheap phone and makes someone cry sitting on a cinder block. Surprised at the kindness of digits, the priests and the imams and the monks all do their small quiet work. A blessing over a boat, a chant that resets the room's rhythm, a hand on a forehead cooler than the air. Religious language is elastic enough to hold storms without breaking. Behind it, the Secular Versions Act. Engineers with clipboards on procurement officers comparing bids for culvert pipe and refusing to with suspiciously similar fonts. Health officers fanning out with vaccine coolers. Now humming again to keep measles at bay. World where crowding is opportunity for viruses. Bangkok publishes its ledger of avoided failures. Gates that held, pumps that ran, subdistricts that stayed dry. It seems like bragging, and it is also a defense against those who will ask, as they will, whether the money for the monkey cheeks would not have been better spent on a bridge you can take a photograph on. The noodle seller moves her cart back to its old corner and puts chili flakes in a cup for free, because everyone looks like they could use a little more fire in their mouths and a little less under their feet. In Autaya, the factory lines start again, one by one. Workers step carefully over hoses, snaking like sleeping things. A manager gathers everyone and says thank you and means it. Then, essays. We have orders to catch, and means that too. The flood wall is streaked and imperfect, and did its job. The farmer whose field took the water watch's waterfowl picked through silt with a curiosity he refuses to dignify as hope. He will file for compensation. He will wait. He will plant again, because even a wounded pocket knows that to do nothing would be to add insult to injury. In Hugh, men sleeps for 12 hours, badly. He dreams of lines rising, of screens going dark, of voices from speakers in rooms with no walls, of rivers that learn to speak to him in words he pretends not to understand. He wakes to normal rain and a text from his wife, bring breakfast. That breaks the spell of numbers. He rides through a city that smells like things drying. He notes the chalk line left by the water on buildings, the index for a story that will be told for the next month, and is grateful for chalk, and not paint. The humanitarian machinery begins to scale down as neighbors scale up. Asionarad stays long enough to help with the last 3 West Matrix, and shakes hands with provincial staff, who have learned 3 new acronyms, and taught to old proverbs in exchange. The UN agencies shift from surge to support, from pallets to purchase orders that spin the local economy. The Red Cross societies look at their volunteers and wonder how to give them rest that is not yet earned in anyone's opinion. Relief slips into recovery the way dusk becomes night, unnoticed, then obvious. Behind the immediate, the costs tally themselves in languages that are not monies. Children miss 3 days, 10 days, 2 weeks. Teachers become social workers for a month. Clinics count insomnia on paper, as if that made it sleep. Families moved in with relatives who will love them fiercely for 3 days, tolerate them for 3 weeks, and then negotiate a truce none of them chose. Fishermen feed their boats, and their boats, starved of days at sea, sulk like animals confined too long. And then there is the money. Reconstruction inflation in central Vietnam. A contractor in Da Nang explained steel has a new price because everyone wants it at once. Insurance adjusters in Manila tours neighborhoods and explain deductibles to people who have learned the word too late. In Thailand, compensation forms multiply like mushrooms. Someone at the district office wonders aloud whether the forms breed when left overnight. A bank offers a flood repair loan at a rate that wears a polite smile. A village microfinance group offers one at a rate with no interest in much honor. The difference is counted in the stories told at a funeral later of a man who tried to hold too much water in his hands. Still, there are gains that will never sit neatly in a budget line. The shelter that did not leak because someone funded the second line of screws. The child who did not get sick because a chlorine tablet arrived on time. The transformer that did not drown because of a sandbag moved by a man whose name will not enter any report. The dam release that managed risk without creating panic, because years of quiet education taught a city to listen to rivers like neighbors. Scientists will write papers about the sea's heat in the Western Pacific in 2025, about how La Nina nudged tracks westward, about bathymetry in bays and surge, about changes in the monsoon's moods. They will be right and late. People will keep buying rope and rice when the forecast first says tropical depression, because they have learned that the difference between preparedness and fear is practice. Governments will shift budgets, not because of speeches in Glasgow or Dubai, but because a line on a wall in Hue rose high enough to touch new paint. What ties these places together is not only weather but kinship. The same planes that brought tarps to Katanjuans fly water filters to Ubon, then Buckies to DA. Not the same acronym soup that made officials smile in Jakarta translates into hands-on stretches of rope in places with names that can feel far until you see the same gray of floodwater under the same kind of sky. ASEAN's promise looks less like communiques and more like a shared table under a tent with rice, fish sauce, salted eggs, and volunteers who've learned to sleep sitting up. The last act is quiet. The gym becomes a gym again. The loudspeakers fall, silent. The hoarded candles go back into a drawer with the reverence reserved for tools proven useful. Children draw rivers on paper, and this is the part that will comfort and frighten the adults in equal measure draw. The floodplains as if they were normal, because they are. The older ones draw boats better than they draw cars. Someone laughs, and someone cries, because the same world contains both. Liza hangs laundry and stands a moment under a line of shirts that drip in the brilliant morning sun. She has slept for hours in 2 days, and will sleep again when the lists are shorter. Mangtino rebuilds the small dock with the practical poetry of a man who has understood for 60 years that the sea is a king that will not love you back and still feeds you. Ben asks if he can go help at the school, and she says yes without turning it into a lesson. Min buys breakfast and finds the city already in line.com. Each person's place clear, and thinks, not for the first time, that a line is a kind of resilience too. In Awutaya, a man in a hard hat sits on a cement block and drinks water that tastes so clean it feels like a miracle. There will be another season. The maps will bloom again with swirling symbols. The loudspeakers will be tested at noon on a Wednesday. Somebody will refuse to leave. Somebody will leave too soon. But here, now, in the aftermath that is beginning to be called recovery, the price has been paid in part, and the receipts crinkle in pockets and files and minds. The lesson is not that storms will stop. It is that people can make choices that keep storms from becoming catastrophes every time. The choice to listen early. The choice to build higher, or not build back at all, in a place where the river writes in the bold strokes of a cliff. The choice to move money faster than water. The river drops a centimeter. The sea glitters with the kind of indifference that looks like beauty. The city breathes. Someone plays a radio softly, and across the region, 1,000 small, axe sweeping, mending, paying, forgiving are the true end of the storm. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.